Dai's overhaul was continuing at a rapid pace, but soon Mr. Edmondson and Mr. Dibdin had discovered many more problems than they had first expected. They were extremely limited in what they could achieve, being bound to a minuscule budget. Dai was less than pleased with this treatment, but he knew that he had no choice.
For God's sakes, Mr. Edmondson, how does Mr. Davies expect us to do this? It's impossible.
Patience, dear Thomas. Patience. You clearly never worked for the coal board.
No, Matthew, I didn't.
Well, I did. And this mentality is nothing new to me. Why, I kept Ian going for years with nothing more than tools in workshop. Do you think we had money for overhauls?
No.
No, we did not. My task was to keep Ian running under any circumstances, and that meant make do and mend with almost everything. Why do you think his rods are shot? His bearings were just greased up every single day. There was nothing else that I could do.
But this is not right. Yeah, sure, we can get him going again, but he'll be back in here every day for repairs. Something will give sometime.
You're absolutely right, Thomas. You're absolutely right. And I'll bet you £1,000 it'll be his frames that go first. That crack isn't going to fix itself, you know.
Do you think it will hold, Mr. Edmondson?
Well, Di, it'll hold for now. But what else can we do? I know where I can get a new spring and ore guards from. Or I can even make 'em for you. But we can't lift your boiler out.
Well, what can we do to ensure that it holds?
Well, Mr. Anthony's going to weld it together, Di. This may help prevent it breaking soon, but it's only a temporary fix. And if we weld it, it means you'll lose your suspension on your rear right-hand side, and that's the most critical point.
Why is it so critical, Mr. Edmondson?
That's because it's carrying the weight of the boiler and firebox. So basically, Di, when you're running, you're going to have to take it easy. No thrashing or carelessness. All it'll take is one jolt and it'll crack. And then we'll be up the creek without a paddle.
The problems with Dai's overhaul were soon reported to the board of directors, and so, amid the nearing crisis, Mr. Davies called a board meeting at the company's new headquarters at Llandeardog Station. Good evening, gentlemen of the board. Our first order of business tonight is the overhaul of our engine, Dai. Mr. Edmondson, if you please.
Where do I start, Mr. Davies?
At the beginning, if you please.
Well, if you want it from the beginning, his valve gear's seized, frames are cracked, bearings are rusted, vacuum brakes jammed on, brake rigging needs adjusting, and...
Mr. Edmondson, please, in English. Some members of the board are not technically minded.
Sorry, sir. To put it in a nutshell, we've found many more problems with him than first anticipated, all of which must be rectified before he can enter service.
Do you think he'll be ready by April?
April? No. Not a chance.
Quiet! Quiet, please! Now, I know this overhaul is not going to be as easy as I'd once hoped, but
this engine is not going to be ready. You told us your engine will be ready for the start of the open season.
And I intend to keep my word, Mr. Bruce.
But can't you see, Mr. Davies? Dai is a rusted pile of scrap. We need to get an engine ready.
What about Ian?
Exactly. All Ian needs is new connecting rods and a boiler inspection, right?
Well, no. Ian needs vacuum brakes fitted.
Ian is not suitable for...
I would like to call a vote. Since our so-called general manager cannot keep a promise, all those in favour of prioritising Ian's restoration over Dai's, please say aye.
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 What? Thomas?
Matthew, listen, we've been working on Dai for months, and we're no closer to getting him running again. We just don't have the time. We cannot risk it.
Yeah, alright. Count me in. Aye.
How about you, Mr. Davies?
I think we are making a terrible mistake. Ian is not vacuum fitted, and neither does he have the water capacity to run this line. You are making a terrible mistake, gentlemen.
What say you, Mr. Davies?
I have no choice now. This is a terrible mistake. The motion was passed, and Mr. Edmondson and Mr. Dibdin set to work on restoring Ian to working order. This proved to be a much easier task, as Ian was still working at the colliery until late the previous year. Mr. Bruce had convinced the board to spend its remaining capital on connecting rods for Ian. These came from Blaen Ebw Colliery, and they were fitted immediately. Dai was shunted out of the shed in order for Ian to be overhauled. Dai felt miserable, and Mr. Davies came to see him. Mr. Davies, what's going to happen? I don't know, Dai. I tried to explain that Ian doesn't have the water capacity for this line. He has only got small tanks. If they run him too hard, he'll drop those fusible plugs and we'll be in the same boat as we are now. It's a long line, Mr. Davies. He's only a little saddle tank, but he is keen to please. That may be, Dai, but what about the vacuum brakes? How long will it take this board of directors to realise that this is madness? But still, maybe I'm wrong, but perhaps I'm being overcautious. I hope so. I really hope so. Mr. Davies struggled with his doubts as Ian's overhaul continued briskly over the next month, and as spring approached, it was nearing completion. Mr. Davies continued to work on Dai himself, and Mr. Edmondson helped out when he could in his spare time. I really appreciate the help, Matthew.
It's no problem, Mr. Davies. Ian's nearly finished now, and we have the boiler inspector coming this evening to set his safety valves. We'll be ready to run a test drain at long last.
Well, no thrashing Ian, you hear? Take it easy, especially on the first run. We cannot afford to drop a fusible. Imagine the bad publicity. What about his brakes?
Well, we're going to cross that bridge when we get to it, Mr. Davies.
You are, of course, pulling my leg. Just as they were taking a short tea break, Leslie and the work gang came in from a long day's work on the line. Never mind. I'll leave Mr. Bruce to deal with it.
Hello, Mr. Davies. We have a problem.
We have lots of problems, Mr. Julian. What's this problem?
Well, we have been working on the Avon Luid cliff top. We've stabilised the wall with concrete, but we have run out of new sleepers.
Well, I'll ask Mr. Bruce to order us some more. We must have some money left over. Mr. Davies was wrong, and was given a nasty shock when he went to visit Mr. Bruce in the office.
No can do, Mr. Davies. The company has no money left.
How can we have no money? But what about the starting capital I invested? Where has that gone?
All gone, Mr. Davies. We shouldn't have spent anything on that stupid engine of yours.
Well, if you hadn't have given up on Dai so quickly, we could have had a working engine by now. He's not that bad.
But you heard Mr. Edmondson. You heard all those problems that Dai has. You know how rusty he is.
Mr. Bruce, all metal objects rust. I've sailed on ships which are far rustier than Dai will ever be. Still, that's that, I suppose. Where did the last of the budget go, may I ask?
It went on refurbishing Mr. Anthony's coaches, Mr. Davies.
Mr. Davies stormed out of the office and headed home. Just as he reached the door, he heard a noise. That sounds like an engine. Mr. Davies was right, and soon enough Ian came steaming through the tunnel towards his house. Mr. Bruce was on the footplate, and he gave a loud toot on the whistle as they screamed past. Bloody fools! Absolute bloody fools!
William? What on earth? What was that noise?
It was those bloody fools I was foolish enough to start a company with.
So, you've had a good day then?
Ha! A good day? With idiots like that around, we might as well give up trying to restart this railway.
Don't give up now, William. Dai is relying on you.
I know, and I've let him down. I feel like such a fool. I should just give up now.
Don't you dare say that, William. You saved Dai. You saved him from being scrapped. You've given him a new lease on life, and you owe it to him to keep fighting. Do it for Dai.
It's times like these when I like having you around, Victoria.
I'm more than just a pretty face, you know.
The next day, Mr. Davies arrived at the yard to find Mr. Edmondson and Mr. Dibdin looking puzzled.
Mr. Davies!
At last, sir, you're here.
What's up? You look exhausted. Mr. Edmondson, have you been up all night?
Yes, I've been searching the entire line for Ian. Have you seen him?
Ian? No. Well, not since last night. Those fools came storming past my house at 100 miles per hour. Why?
Well, sir, we fired Ian up last night for his steam test, but I had to go and sort some paperwork out with Boiler Inspector. And Mr. Bruce, Mr. Julian, Mr. Anthony were still around, but they took off with Ian down the bloody line.
But they aren't qualified drivers, and we don't have permission to go out on the main line yet.
They never came back last night. I saw them puffing down the line, but I never heard them come back.
Oh, Gordon bloody Bennett! Dai felt worried for Ian, but just then, the telephone rang. Mr. Davies! Mr. Davies! Yes, Dai? Telephone! Get it, please, Thomas.
Hello, Shedmaster speaking. Oh, well that's not good. Okay, I'll tell him. Goodbye. Well, we found Ian.
Where?
Outside Pennyog. The signalman just rang. They ran out of water last night, and have been stranded there since. Now they're holding up the last harbour working train.
Then there is no time to lose. Leslie! Leslie!
Yes, sir.
We have a job for you. We're going on a rescue mission. The rescue train made their way along the line. Leslie slowed cautiously as they passed the Avon Lewid cliff top. They paused for a moment to inspect the track work. It doesn't look so good here.
Look, these old wooden sleepers are so badly rotten, the chairs are sinking under the weight.
Is that bad?
Is that bad? The whole train leans over toward the river. How do you fancy a fall on the cliff, Leslie?
Leslie gulped.
I would like to go now, please, sirs. I don't feel comfortable sat here.
I guess repairing those coaches was more important than repairing this section of the line, eh?
Well, we'll have to do something about it. We cannot run trains on this.
Leslie pushed on, and soon they reached Pennyog, where they were stopped by a signal. Mr. Davies walked forward and saw some very angry-looking railwaymen.
Ah! There you are, at long last. I've cleared the line for you. Gary here has been shunted into the loop. Isn't that right, Gary?
Aye, you bloody amateurs. If we'd known how much trouble you were going to cause, we'd have never let you take over this line. Fancy running an engine dry on its first day.
I'm so sorry to inconvenience you gentlemen. We'll be out of your way as soon as we can.
Damn right you will. My foreman will want a word with you, my man. He isn't impressed with this lark.
Mr. Davies returned to the train, and Leslie pulled forward through Pennyog Station. Soon they found Ian, looking dazed and confused. Mr. Davies was shocked to see a large scorched area on the embankment. Right then, clever boys. Whose bright idea was it to go gallivanting out on the main line?
It was a simple mistake. It could have happened to anyone.
Happened to anyone? You purposefully did this. Mr. Davies, Mr. Bruce here drove Ian so fast and so far that we ran out of water. He didn't even know that the fusible plugs had gone.
Yes, I did.
Don't lie. You didn't have a clue.
How the hell? You dropped the fusible?
How the hell did you manage that?
It wasn't my fault.
Not your fault! You only stopped because I put the brakes on and shoveled the fire out.
Yeah, so about the fire.
When we shoveled the fire out, it set the embankments on fire. We had the fire brigade up here as well. After they put the fire out, we...
What? No. Please God, no. Don't you tell me you put water in firebox.
Yes, Mr. Edmondson.
Is that bad?
Mr. Edmondson frantically climbed into Ian's cab and inspected his firebox. He emerged with bad news.
What's the damage?
The damage. They've wrecked him. They've wrecked his firebox. You completely wrecked it. This was our only locomotive. This was our one shot.
Mr. Edmondson walked away. He was so angry that he could scream. Mr. Davies turned back to the culprits. Well, I hope you've all learned a valuable lesson today, chaps. We're supposed to be proving that we can run a railway, and so far, thanks to your own incompetence, we're only proving that we don't have a clue. Mr. Bruce, Mr. Julian, and Mr. Anthony all felt miserable.
Well, let's get Ian back to the yard. We can see what we can fix.
Forget it, Mr. Dibdin. I've seen what happens when hot steel meets cold water. Ian will need a new firebox. Leslie coupled up to Ian, and they set off for home. Ian looked so miserable. He felt like he had let the team down.
Cheer up, Ian. It wasn't your fault.
Ian said nothing. He just looked down at his buffers. Sadly, when they reached Llandiadog, Mr. Davies saw a figure whom he wished he couldn't see. Oh no.
What? What is it, Mr. Davies?
It's Mr. Hancock. He is one of the potential investors. Why on earth is he here? Today of all days. Mr. Davies slowly walked over. Mr. Stovall had brought Mr. Hancock down to the yard. Mr. Davies was not looking forward to this meeting.
Good morning, Mr. Davies.
Good morning, Mr. Hancock. How are you?
Well, I've just driven down from Scotland to visit you, Mr. Davies. Been having some trouble with your engines, have you?
Well, yes, a little.
I heard all about it, Mr. Davies. It's in the local newspapers this morning. Local amateurs set fire to railway embankment. I believe the headline was...
I can explain.
This headline was followed up by the subtitle. Fire Brigade put out steam engines fire. Is this true? Did you seriously put water in a firebox?
Please, just let me explain, Mr. Hancock.
I don't believe you can explain this, Mr. Davies. I was told by yourself, in fact, I could trust you and your organisation. I have experienced this tomfoolery before, and my engine, Stephanie, was damaged as a result. That's why I'm trying to find a new home for my Stephanie. After seeing the shambles here today, Mr. Davies, I can inform you that I am no longer interested in investing your railway, and I can assure you that Stephanie and none of my rolling stock will be coming here. Good day.
Mr. Hancock walked briskly away, and Mr. Davies stood silently in the yard.
Mr. Davies? Mr. Davies, what should we do now?
What can we do now, Mr. Stovall? We're finished. Mr. Davies! Mr. Davies looked around. He saw Dai sat in the siding. Mr. Davies! Yes, Dai? I won't let you down, sir.
Don't be silly, Dai. You need a hell of a lot of work.
But you heard Mr. Edmondson, Dai. We don't have any more money left. Well, let's just finish what we can. Put a fire in me and see what happens, eh? What have I got to lose, Mr. Davies? You might as well try to steam me up. I'm as good as scrap otherwise. Mr. Davies thought for a moment, and then he sighed. What have we got to lose? Let's do it, Mr. Edmondson.
Yes?
Let's get Dai in the shed. Let's get him running. We're not giving up that quickly.
Aye, aye, Mr. Davies.
What about us, Mr. Davies?
Get on with the coaches for now. We need them ready. Our first train is on Saturday, correct?
Yes, but...
No buts, Mr. Anthony. Just make it work. We've got less than a week left to go.
Just make it work? You're not seriously going to continue working on Dai, surely not.
Mr. Bruce, just go home and never come back to this railway. You've done enough damage.
You're firing me?
Yes, I am.
What? You can't fire me. I'm a member of the board. It's only the board of directors that can fire me.
All members of the board are here, Mr. Bruce. Meeting is in session. I would like to propose a vote. All those in favour of dismissing Mr. Bruce from his role as administrator, say aye now.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
No!
And all those against?
This is preposterous!
Motion passed. Mr. Bruce, you are hereby dismissed from the Penwyth Valley Railway Company. Good day to you, sir. The motion was passed, and Mr. Bruce was dismissed. The workmen shunted Dai back into the workshops again, and his overhaul started immediately. Mr. Bruce stood in the yard, gobsmacked. That night, he went to the pub to drink his sorrows away. Whilst he was there, he met 3 strange-looking gentlemen.
Good evening, Mr. Bruce.
It's a tough time for you, isn't it?
How can you tell?
That's your 5th whiskey in a row. You're Mr. Bruce, the bus driver, aren't you?
Was, my friend. I was. Not anymore. I gave it all up for a stupid railway company and they fired me.
Yes, we've heard all about it.
They treated you very unfairly, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
Who are you? And what do you want?
Please allow me to introduce myself. I am Mr. Smith of Smith & Sons Limited. These are my 2 sons, Michael and Jimmy. We have a little proposition for you, Mr. Bruce.